This is Top of Mind, the Dr. Patrick Slowinski Show.
Good afternoon, Dr. Slowinski, and welcome to another episode of Top of Mind to our great listeners. We've had a lot of guests lately, huh?
Yeah, we have, and I thought we'd take a little break from the guest and just have us talk about all the really critical things that are happening in the world and in the United States right now.
That's right, back to our roots, back to how it started. I just want to personally thank everyone who supported us along the way. I promise we're not gonna give up and we will continue on publishing these amazing episodes with even better lineups of guests moving forward. So stay tuned, Dr. Slowinski. I'm gonna hand it over to you. I know we have some interesting topics to explore with you today.
Yeah, we're going to start with the a bit of pop culture, and just the cultural norms. I was actually really happy to learn that it's not just conservatives that are bothered by cheating. And of course, I'm talking about the Coldplay concert and the former CEO now of Astronomer had to resign from his job. And I think the person he was having an affair with, she was the HR head and she had to resign. And their life's just been turned upside down. But the reason it got turned upside down and they were so embarrassed, and we'll show the clip in a second, is because they were doing something that they felt they weren't supposed to be doing. And so let's go ahead and roll the famous clip that everybody's seen.
Astronomer's head of HR, Kristen Cabot, is out, officially resigning after being caught on that now infamous kiss cam with her boss, CEO Andy Byron, who stepped down 6 days ago. The 52-year-old was seen for the first time since the scandal, the Daily Mail exclusive with the photo of her, wedding ring off, watering plants outside her $2.2 million New Hampshire home.
We all know the background, right? There's this Coldplay concert and they do a kiss cam where they look for couples and they get this couple that worked for Astronomer. I think he was the CEO, and they were um, in an affectionate position. And it turns out that the reaction said it all, right? And then Coldplay's lead singer Chris had to come out and say, well, they're either very shy or cheating. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about the cheating in a second, in maybe a more serious tone about the concept of cheating, and not just the people that are actually involved in the affair or the cheating, but lots of different people associated to those people that are affected by it. But before we get to the serious part, let's play the clip on some of the memes that have resulted because of them getting caught on the kiss cam.
After the Astronomer CEO incident at Coldplay, the internet turned it into a meme. Sports mascots led the charge. At a Phillies game, the Philly fanatic mimicked the exact moment on the Jumbotron, raising its arms just like the viral video. The Arizona Diamondbacks mascot, D. Baxter the Bobcat, hugged a Cardinals fan and then ducked out of view. A perfect parody. SportsCenter hosts even acted it out live on TV, adding their own twist. Fans across stadiums in Utah, Atlanta, and Missouri recreated the scene on their own kiss cams. Even the Savannah Bananas mascot hugged Princess Potassia before dramatically jumping away. After the astronomer...
All right, so it became this kind of pop culture thing for people to unite around. So I have mixed emotions, right? So people seem to be uniting around the concept that cheating is a bad thing. So let's talk about first, and of course, this cheating is a relationship, right? Both of them were married, and both of them were cheating on their spouses. So not only did they ruin their careers, but they also affected the lives of probably children, their actual spouses. But cheating, we often think of cheating, if we're not talking about personal relationships, cheating on a test, um, cheating on something that gives you an advantage, right? So the idea is that in order to cheat, there has to be a system or a set of rules that you have agreed to abide by that you break. And so in this case, they broke their vows to each other that they made, and maybe any particular legal agreements that they made with their spouses to go ahead and have this office affair. And I think what's even more disturbing was that there were other people from the office there that knew about it. I don't know if they facilitated it all, but at the end of the day, they were caught, and now they're facing just terrible consequences. Do I think that it's just? Well, each case is different, but my feeling on this is if you had a contract, and in this case it was a marriage contract, when you go and make vows, whether you have a prenuptial agreement or not, it's irrelevant. You agree to only be with that particular spouse in an intimate way, or just maybe not even an intimate way. There's a lot of cheating, I think, that happens with people that is non-sexual. You hear this about work spouses, right? So people are, whether they have sexual relations with that person or not, but they're cheating in terms of time, in terms of interest, the amount of text they send to their work spouses, and then leaving their real spouses in the dark and neglected because of it. So going back to that concept, they broke the covenants or the agreements that they made, vows that they took with each other. And now there are consequences for that. So my advice to people that do not want to be in a relationship that they've committed to, before you break any of those commitments, you get out of that relationship. It's so much easier going forward that if there wasn't that stain of cheating. And you'll see that it was an interesting thing that united both, I think, conservatives and Democrats, that most people thought it was wrong for these two to be cheating on their spouses, and getting caught is sort of like karma or just desserts. So my whole sense has been, if you're going to make those commitments to each other and you feel like you can't keep them anymore, then before you actually do something to break those commitments, you get out of that relationship. And everybody has tons of excuses for not getting out of the relationship. But I think this example will stay in pop culture in the United States for a long time as evidence of now two families are broken up, children are affected, livelihoods are affected. Good luck of those two getting a job, because it's so world known now, and it's not just memes and comments in the United States. It's gone very global, and it's raised this opportunity to have a discussion on what it means to be faithful to something or someone. And so that's where I think we can have more discussions about it. But I have always talked to people that I think that the painful, one of the real painful effects, if you will, of cheating is that there was a contract and it was broken and the other person kept it. Now, you do have some cases where they're both cheating, and I'm not going to talk about that. And I don't know, to be fair, if the other spouses were cheating. Um, but it goes back to that. If you're not unable to keep that contract, why do you stay in it? You're just hurting yourself. You're hurting other people by doing that. So I think I've talked about that enough. But marriage is a contract. For many people, it's a spiritual, religious obligation in addition to a legal contract, and there are repercussions for breaking that. So with that, let's go over to some other news here that I thought was interesting. Is a big EU-US trade deal. So why don't we go ahead and launch that clip that was just announced this morning by President Trump and the EU Commissioner.
Thank you very much. So we have good news. We've reached a deal. It's a good deal for everybody, I believe. And I think you were saying this is probably the biggest deal ever reached in any capacity, trade or beyond trade.
It is.
It's a giant deal with lots of countries. So we're going to do the following. The European Union is going to agree to purchase from the United States $750 billion worth of energy. $750 billion worth of energy. They are going to agree to invest into the United States $600 billion more than they're investing already. So they're investing a large amount of money. You know what that amount of money is. It's very substantial, but they're going to invest an additional $600 billion. they're agreeing to open up their countries to trade at zero tariff. So that's a very big factor. Opening up their countries, all of the countries will be opened up to trade with the United States at zero tariff. And they're agreeing to purchase a vast amount of military equipment. We don't know what.
All right. So President Trump going down some of the successes. He's been really adamant about getting his trade team, which I think has done a great job. You have the Treasury Secretary, you have the U.S. Trade Representative, what we call the USTR. And some of our listeners and viewers know I worked over there for a detail from the State Department, a detailed assignment over there. And I worked on Central Asian, South Asian trade deals. It was one of the best government services I've ever performed. And it's a vital part of strengthening our countries, having solid trade deals that are fair for the American worker and the American consumer. And President Trump has been, somewhere in the clip, the EU commissioner talks about what a tough negotiator he is. And then he said, I hope you also think I'm fair. And I don't know if she really answered that. But this is good news, and it's on the back of a bunch of other news where you have other trade deals in the works with Japan and others, big players and also smaller players. So you've got President Trump moving forward on these trade deals. He's got other things going on in addition to trying to strengthen the United States domestically. And that's all of the hotspots going on in the world. I noticed today, producer Victor, that there's issues between Thailand and Cambodia that are frenetic now, that they're military issues. You still have that in places throughout the world. If you look at Kashmir between India and Pakistan, if you look in parts of Africa, even I'm thinking of Eritrea and Ethiopia. These wars don't seem to end. You have the skirmishes that pop up in between Armenia and Azerbaijan, even though depending on which news you read, the other side has lost and everything's fine. Well, that never really is the case. These conflicts just keep going. You have Belarus saying that they want to join Russia, but they've been talking about that for decades. But again, you've got all of these issues, and of course you have Gaza. So go ahead and let's talk a little bit about Gaza. And let's start with this clip that we have about aid, food aid to Gazans. I think I have that clip for you there. All right, so we're Arabic speakers. Even if you don't speak Arabic, a lot of us know the Allahu Akbar, glory to God. And when they're seeing these shipments of aid and food, I think there were over 80 children who reportedly died of starvation in the region. So it's a real issue. I know President Trump has been extremely supportive of Israel, but he's been critical on some of the steps that Israel has taken, including the bombings in Syria, where President Trump has been working very hard to forge a different relationship with Syria. So it hasn't been 100% happiness with Israel, and Israel itself is always in a precarious position because it's often Israel versus the entire Middle East. And so they have to make decisions to protect a very small country. So those are all going on, Victor, at the same time. And then you have stuff going on at home, of course. Any move the president makes, any move he doesn't make, anything he says, anything he doesn't say, the media will hold him accountable for in ways that they have never held Democrat presidents in for that kind of accountability. So he's still dealing with that at home. One of them, though, what's interesting is what is going on with what happened with the Russia hoax, right? So first it was called President Trump was either a Russian agent. Later on, when he beat Hillary Clinton, she called him an illegitimate president many times after 2016, and several other of the Democrat cronies joined in with that, accused him of colluding with the Russians. So you have the whole Russian collusion hoax. Well, now we have a new director of national intelligence, right? The DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, who's a former Democrat congresswoman from Hawaii, who's now running that shop. She has become a Republican and is in the cabinet with President Trump. And she has uncovered things that I think make sense to a lot of people who were saying there's got to be something there. This whole plot to make President Trump some kind of Russian agent came around December, after he had already won in November, and it just never stopped. And when he took off office, it just continued. And then you had James Comey going over and having his folks, his agents, go over to the White House to then National Security Advisor General Mike Flynn. And he got implicated in all of those things, whether he met with the Russian ambassador, whether he didn't, whether he shared information he wasn't supposed to, all of these things. And his life was completely ruined. And now you have a second Trump term, but this term is 4 years. There was a break of 4 years, and we had President Biden. And now you have people looking at what really happened in 2016. So I hear this when people are like, oh, it was so long ago, who cares? Well, people care. They just, even if nothing happens to President Obama, and I'm very dubious that anything would happen to a president because of the Supreme Court's rulings that have been very favorable, I think, to both President Trump and President Biden already, but now they seem to be favorable to President Obama. It's unlikely anything will happen in terms of charges to President Obama, President Biden. I'm doubtful anything will happen to former Secretary Clinton. But here's the deal. It's a big deal for a lot of Americans who thought something didn't smell right, and that President Trump was attacked from within and without by this hoax. And it really damaged his presidency. And one could argue, had he not had to spend all that time lawyering up and trying to protect himself and prove to Americans that he wasn't a Russian stooge, that maybe he could have used that energy and time and resources on other policies that could have got him reelected. And as it was, he didn't lose by much against Biden. So I think we have a clip of what's going on now, and we're going to take a little bit of time talking about the Department of Justice and revisiting the whole Russia collusion hoax.
Lindsey Graham and John Cornyn are both calling on the Justice Department to name a special counsel to look into those newly declassified documents on former President Obama's 2016 Russia briefings. This all coming as the DOJ forms a so-called strike force to review the latest intelligence. So the question now, where is this investigation heading? Former Justice Department official Hans von Spakovsky joins me now to talk all about it. Hans, great to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Sure thing.
In your opinion, would a special counsel be appropriate here?
Well, I don't think it's really needed. You know, they're forming a strike force. What that means is they're going to pull in experienced lawyers from the different divisions that have experience in this. So I would assume that would include both the National Security Division, the Criminal Division, and agents from the FBI. And I don't think they need a separate special counsel to do that. That kind of a strike force can get to the bottom of what happened.
So far with what DNI Tulsi Gabbard has disclosed, it seems like there's a decent amount of smoke, right? Have you seen any fire yet, in your opinion?
Well, the biggest problem for the former president and Comey, Brennan, Rice is there's evidence of falsification of intelligence reports. That's a potential violation of federal law. In fact, it's a potential violation of one of the laws that former Special Counsel Jack Smith tried to use against Donald Trump. The biggest problem the strike force is going to have, I don't think, is evidence of wrongdoing. The biggest problem they're going to have is the statute of limitations. That's usually 5 years for most federal criminal statutes. To stretch that out, they would have to show that the conspirators here hid what they did, therefore the statute didn't start running, or it was a continuous conspiracy that ran on for years after 2016 and 2017. Those are tough standards to meet.
So if I'm
All right,
hearing
we can stop there. So whether or not they're successful, the Trump administration and the Department of Justice with Attorney General Pam Bondi, whether they're really successful in getting some charges against these high-level people, that's one thing. But I think it's important for the American people to see that an investigation is going. People really hate it on the right, the more conservatives, especially after January 6th. It seems like there are two tiers of justice for those who participated, for example, in all of the riots in 2020, the Summer of Love, where many people were killed in those riots after George Floyd. And then you have, compare that to what happened on January 6th, where one person was killed at the event. And that was one of the protesters, one of the Trump supporters and protesters, who was a former military person, Ashley Babbitt. So you have this idea of, well, I hope something good happens. Good being that there's some kind of justice for these people. I think probably the most vulnerable person is, I thought it was Clapper originally, but I'm sure it's John Brennan, the former CIA director now, because he's just really, there's a great word in English, oleaginous. And he's just really oily and tricky. And he's not he's a smart man. You wouldn't get that position by being, but very, very deceitful, I think, to the American people is the argument, is that he said some things under oath that were outright lies that the evidence is pointing to. I don't know if that's true. But clearly there is significant evidence that the NDI director, that the Director of National Intelligence, DNI Director Gabbard, has brought out. And let me just backtrack. The big issue is, for the longest time, the Democrats were denying that they had any involvement in setting up this kind of, and using the dossiers, the Russian dossier that they could use against President Trump, the Steele dossier. And it turns out that if you look at the meetings and you look at the dates and all the evidence that Tulsi Gabbard is providing now, there's a real argument that this was called for in December after President Trump had already won in November. So that's the issue, is that now is it worth the taxpayers' money to have an investigation at the FBI and other agencies to find out what really happened, and if the former Obama administration really had a plan to thwart the Trump administration with this stuff that they knew not to be true, and they used intelligence to do it. That's a big deal. That's a big deal for people like me who have clearances. And I wanted to talk a little bit about security clearances tonight, because I think that's come up with some of our viewers as they hear us talk about security clearances. And often we just say it. People who work for the federal government, we just talk about it and that's it. But people who haven't worked for the military or the federal government or another organization where they need a security clearance, maybe a contractor, they don't know much about it. And basically, if you're a retired federal employee and you're able to keep your security clearance, it really opens up avenues and doors for you to continue your employment after your government service that nobody else really can do. So because the security process takes a long time, and you would want to vet people, not just super quickly, you'd want to vet them carefully, make sure they're not going to be potential spies or they have serious financial issues or whatever it may be, these vulnerabilities. You want to take some time and go through and investigate, talk to their family members, their neighbors, co-workers, see all the records, see if they've committed any crimes, have they been involved in anything that's a potential vulnerability for them to sit and hold this clearance, because the clearance gives you access to classified information. It doesn't mean you can just take it home, but it means you can see it. And just by having that clearance, because the process takes a long time, not everybody gets it, and I'm fine with that. I think you could speed up some clearances in some cases, but other times, the higher level of clearance, I think the more vetting is justified. But then you also have the question, Victor, of, bureaucratic processes that could be, expedited and just made more efficient to speed up that process. But nevertheless, whether you speed up the process or not, the reality is that these people who have worked in the government for years, like John Brennan, like James Clapper, they have made additional monies. How much I don't know, but I would guess millions, because they've had clearances. They've been able to keep those clearances after their military service or their government service and turn those into lucrative positions, board of directors, consultants. Cleared consulting is a big deal. And if you're able to come in and see things still and weigh in on things, it makes you valuable. So for me, I would always, and I'm in that same category. I'm a former employee. Um, I can benefit from having that clearance as well. But I think if it's something that we're seeing from all of this fallout is that we really need to take a look at all of the benefits that federal employees have, and we love their service and we benefit from those their service on a daily basis. But do they need all of that? And does that, by being able to just keep that clearance for years, even after you retire or you quit or you resign, and you're able to keep that and turn that into more lucrative positions? I don't know if that's really fair to the American people. So one of the things I've been doing lately is talking to people about, if you're in the federal government, and you leave, should you just leave? And my opinion is, well, it's difficult because sometimes the only jobs you can get are other federal jobs, because you have clearance and you know the system and you become an ideal candidate. So it's not so simple. But these big fat cats on the top of the food chain, the John Brennans of the world, absolutely take them away. They can still write books. They're going to be fine. But their ability to come in and then write letters or sign letters accusing people of things, or to sign letters saying that the Hunter laptop was a joke and it was Russian disinformation. They're able to use their credentials as former, national security officials that still have clearance. So I think that's something that I would go at. I wouldn't go after the small fish contractors that are just helping our government on a daily basis. But I think the big guys, they can do a lot of damage if they're not completely bipartisan or fair and objective, and that they lean one certain way in their politics. So I would not be sad if heads of organizations or very high senior people didn't have automatic renewal of their clearances. So with that, we've got other things going on in the world. One of the things that you and I follow closely is what's going on in Ukraine. So, Producer Victor, if you want to take a second, what are you hearing about the ongoing war with Russia and Ukraine? Has anything changed?
Well, from the United States perspective, I think people are getting fed up, just like our president. And I don't think it's that much different on the ground, right? All the Ukrainians and Russians I talk to are just exhausted at this point. I don't really like this situation and complacency. I just talked to my grandmother this morning, right? And it's just a part of our daily routine at this point. A little conversation about how tired they are and how much explosions she's heard from her window, right? And her region is also constantly getting bombarded, and every time I ask her about her plans, she just sounds very sad and disappointed, saying something, well, what kind of plans are you talking to? We're just trying to survive. And I think that the general sentiment, people in major cities like Moscow just live their lives. They don't really know about the war unless there is a drone that flies by their neighborhood and gets, crashed into a building. But the next day they pull out their smartphones and order cheeseburgers, go get their latte with soy milk, and life just goes about it. So what are you thinking about this situation, and how do you think Donald Trump is still going to play his cards, because it seems like he genuinely wanted this conflict to end.
And that was him manifesting, I think, his goodwill and desire to see people stop dying. In his words, he famously said, "I want people to stop dying." And it takes two. And you have any time that the West moves on, I think even this deal that you see, this trade deal between the EU and the United States, I think that also makes Putin unhappy. The part of what his job is to do is to divide members of NATO as much as he can in this transatlantic relationship that's been around since World War II, even World War One. Anything he can do to kind of strain that, he tries to do, because it's just a simple game of they have too many people, too many enemies for us to get all of them. So he would like to see the United States and the EU not be close. And one of the things he was hoping is that they wouldn't be able to come to a trade agreement. But that's actually happened. So I think you see from Russian news more rhetoric from Putin about World War III, and if the West doesn't stop using NATO and getting involved in Ukraine, then it's going to be the end of the world. And he doesn't say it per se, but he says that you will face the consequences, and we're prepared to use any means necessary. So that rhetoric's continued today in a meeting that I was watching with him in Russia, and explaining how everybody has attacked him, has attacked Russia, and they've done nothing wrong. So that type of rhetoric's continuing, but it makes me feel like there hasn't been a big breakthrough yet. And then depending on which news you get, I did this before the show. I looked at Russian speaking news. I looked at Ukrainian speaking news. I looked at American news from India, news from Europe, news from Germany. Wherever you look, there's a different take on what's going on in Ukraine, and how Russia has actually been affected in terms of economic impact, in terms of the actual military that they have available, in terms of their weapon stocks. And there's a spin on every side. So I think people are just really opining and stating their opinions and speculating on what's really going on. And I don't think we know. I do know that President Zelensky's under serious corruption charges, but I think that's been going on for a while. He's also talked about, I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was a move to close down some of the transparency organizations in the government that were looking at accountability and transparency, and now those are gone or closed down for now. So those kind of issues are continuing in Ukraine, but for President Trump, it's top of mind. No pun intended. For him is Ukraine, getting that war ended, um, rebuilding Ukraine, getting peace to have people stop dying, and I think the same for him in Gaza. Neither of those situations are easy by any means, and they cannot be, I don't think they can be tackled with diplomacy alone. And if that were the case, they would have been resolved long decades ago, but they've been boiling up. And since it was even before 2014, people always talk about the start of the Ukraine crisis was 2014. It was years before that. I remember living in that part of the world, and you did too. I think you were a little baby then. But when I lived there, there was that animosity still, that Russia was very bitter about the end of the Soviet Union. They felt that they had lost lots of territory, resources that were theirs, and Ukraine was always on the top of the list. And now you've seen over decades of. Did you know that President Putin has been either president or prime minister for over 25 years today?
And that's a very concerning fact, because I just turned 28 years old. So pretty
So
much
yeah,
my
so
entire conscious life's been with under
oh,
the
I think you were
government.
probably conscious at three. You were probably out there, making deals and business already when you were 3 years old. But regardless, this has been a really eventful week. I would tell our listeners, keep your eyes on what the Department of Justice is doing now that they have a strike force. On the one hand, people would like to see some justice, or at least have some questions finally answered of how much President Obama knew, how much he actually directed his team to go after President Trump and his team, and if that was actually the right thing to do. Was it founded, unfounded? That's never really been investigated. And so my Democrat friends are very funny. They say, "Oh, the investigations happened. By whom? By your team, who just didn't do anything. Anytime there's something that they didn't want covered, their investigations didn't do anything, or they blocked investigations." That you could say, well, that's politics. But the fact is, we don't know the extent of the Russian collusion. So he's got that going on. He was just in Scotland, where he did that deal with the EU officially. So the president continues to move all over the world. I know he made a comment about Thailand and Cambodia. So he's hearing things. And again, it's the same thing. He wants all conflict in the world to stop and people to use their lives to build and produce and have profitable and great lives, not lives based in poverty or war. And so I can get behind that. I know he still has tons of people can't stand him who think he's in the Epstein files. Let's talk about the Epstein files real quick before we close our show today. Look, until someone shows me real evidence that President Trump um, had some kind of arrangement with Mr. Epstein, I'm not going to jump to any conclusions. It is disconcerting, though, that so many people were potentially involved in something that hurt young women, in particular, underage young women who were children or minors, at least by the definition. And so people, I think, are rightly concerned about getting answers to how was this man allowed to build up this client list, and if they were clients or just friends, and how so many people were involved in his island. I think people have a right to know that. And I think that it's a difficult thing if you're a president and an administration to deal with, because there are other implications, I think, of what information gets out and what information doesn't. And I think one of the things as we close today is a good program about, when do you declassify information and when can the general public get it? And even when they get it, how much has it been scrubbed? So a lot going on. I wish our listeners a great, fruitful week coming up. And producer Victor, you can send us on our way.
Thank you, Dr. Slowinski, for an amazing episode. Lots of news. I hope next week will bring some positives in as well that we can include in the next podcast. But as you've highlighted, unfortunately, the world just keeps boiling, and summer is never really a calm period. So I just want to thank our subscribers again for all the attention, great clicks and likes, everything you've been providing us. That support really matters to keep the momentum going. Please stay tuned for future guests, and Dr. Slowinski, as always, the last word to you.
Yeah, I think we have a show that we didn't really highlight politics at all coming on. My son is part of it on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think that producer Victor is going out soon, so we encourage people to take a look at that.
Absolutely. Expect it to be released early next week. We're also trying to diversify and go beyond politics, right? We've had amazing episodes on all sorts of topics, from technology and business to foreign affairs. And now we're going to talk about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA. Yes, we're experts in everything, and expect more topics to be covered moving forward.
Thank you, producer Victor.